Okay, so I think as we're getting everybody on slowly, I always am appreciative of the fact that people are coming from other meetings, and so the transition into these calls sometimes is a little tricky, but we also like to be very respectful of everybody's time, including our panelists. So we'll take a slow start into the meeting today. So I've been thinking for a while how to actually describe the role I play. I'm Ursula Erasmus. I formerly was a client of Issoria's. I've now been working with Issoria for, I don't know, it feels in some respects like forever, and in other respects like it's a fresh new thing, because there's always great, exciting new adventures. I was trying to think about how to describe my role in the community, and I had an idea this morning. I think I'm going to call myself the Chief Conversation Officer. Because our Issoria community is all about bringing together change practitioners, whether you are change leaders in full-time corporate positions, or whether you are individuals who contract and follow where the work is as consultants. If change is your jam, this is where you'll find great conversations. So I'm really, really thrilled to welcome you here today. We're going to be touching on a subject that I think is very near and dear to many of our hearts, and try to leave you with some really practical ideas as you walk out of this meeting to apply in your own change practice. But before we do that, I would like to first of all introduce my colleague, Jennifer. Jennifer is my wingman, wingwoman, whatever you like to call it. Jennifer is our marketing person in Issoria. She keeps me sane and makes sure that I know what I'm supposed to be doing with the technology that surrounds the community. So Jennifer, always wonderful to have your support. Thanks for being here with us today. Then I'm going to introduce I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. So Saskia, I will begin with you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. And I love the title of Chief Conversation Officer. So my name is Saskia van den Berg-Tromp. I'm a change manager at Philips. My background has always been in change and guiding people along. So I started my career at Accenture, about 10 years there, and always there on the verge of IT implementations and getting people along. Then I moved over to a large insurance company because I wanted to do what I always jokingly say, a real job. Especially consultants always love it when I say that. But really drive the change also from my own company and see what happens behind the curtains. And that's where I had a lot of good experience with champions that I'll be sharing with you later on as well. And now I'm with Philips for already a good 4 years, where change is really part of the DNA. And for anyone who knows, who has been watching the news, they will realize that as a change manager, being at Philips now really is in the verge of everything that is changing. So I'm looking forward to learning together with you, because I think sessions like this are really a place where people can connect and come together. So looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. Thanks, Saskia. And I will say, I know some of you are here because you know, as well as I know, that Saskia is an awesome human being. I've had the great pleasure of working with Saskia for, gosh, probably 2 years on various Philips things. And she is a really, really stellar human being. Always got a smile on her face, very innovative and a very thoughtful person. Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ursula. Thank you, Saskia. So my name is Martin Dvorak. As you can hear from my name, I'm originally from Czechia. However, I was born and raised in Switzerland. And for the last 20 years, I have been doing a lot of business transformation and change management. So originally, I came from the IT part, implementing Oracle ERP systems across the globe. You know, in the 90s, it was this big 50 million golden egg, large multiple countries rollouts. However, I moved more and more into the people and, let's say, organizational change aspect, because regardless of if you implement SAP or Oracle or JD Edwards, at the end, it's all about people. And also in the last 7 years, I moved more towards HR transformation because that is a topic which now companies move forward to. And the change aspect, nevertheless, whether you do ERP, large IT, or reorgs, or merging operating models, you always need to change. And by change, I think one of the most important things is the 3 aspects of people, organization, and processes. So I'm not specialized in a special vertical. I worked in pharma, in banks, in automotive industry. I think that's I'm very grateful to see so many different companies, but the majority of projects I do is on a global scale. Yes, I'm very happy to join here to provide you with insights, really practical tips for your takeaways, and I hope we will have a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Martin. And I wanted to share with everybody that Martin was actually the catalyst for this event. Martin and I had a conversation a couple of months ago, and I think it's fair to say at that point you'd had lots of more recent lessons about change ambassadors, and I think you were pulling your hair out a little bit at the time. And I said, hey, Martin, why don't we bring this to the community as a conversation? So thank you for actually having the passion to turn this into something that people are interested in, Martin.
And I really think before we jump into the topic, if you ask what is change ambassador, everyone will give you a different answer, right?
100%, absolutely. So there were a couple of things before we jump into the focus of our conversation today that I wanted to cover. First of all, this is a topic that I think so many of us are interested in, and we see that by how many people signed up to come to the event, because the world continues to change fast. Organizations are doing more change at greater speed, and organizations are also leaner in terms of their manpower. So, this is something working with that network of people, whether we call them ambassadors or any other name or title we give them, the people who can extend the reach and the support into the organization are really, really critical. I also wanted to mention that today we're not going to focus on how do you select those people. Saskia, Martin, and I had a conversation last week in preparation for today, and we actually decided that's the next event, because we also know from all of our collective experience that sometimes people are selected not in the most intentional way, which makes it even more difficult. So, hold your questions and thoughts on that. You're welcome to email if you've got any thoughts for another event around that. But today we really want to focus on, so you've got this group of named people. They have been resourced at various levels, and we don't want to debate that either, but we've got these people. How do we really help these folks be the best, do the most impactful work they can for themselves and for their colleagues? So that's really where we're going to try and focus today. And of course, what we know from change conversations is we start with a nugget and sometimes they go to different places. So we shall see where we end up. But I wanted to begin by asking you, Saskia, if you can describe for me, what is the sort of persona, attributes, who's the best change ambassador that you've ever had the experience of working with?
Great, thanks for kicking us off in such a positive way. So when I think about the change ambassadors that really made a difference, I think there are 3 major things that these people had. First, they are well connected, right? So they need to have a network, formal, informal, that they know different people of the organization, and also that they are a connect between other networks. So I think that is the first really, really important thing. The second one is that they're knowledgeable to a certain degree about the topic. So if you have a certain person that is well networked but has never got into the subject before, I think they might not be the best for the job. But the third thing is really important as well, is that they are passionate about it, that they're keen to learn, to connect, and that they have a fire that they can share. And I think if you have the network and the fire, the second one is resolvable. But the first and the last are not to be overlooked. And that is why I think it's so important that you tap into that, and that this is not an afterthought, or that it's a thing that Bob gets, the bottom of the barrel, someone called it. So get those people where if you talk about it, their eyes light up, right? That's the kind of people that you need to have, because they will also generate energy and actually get people along.
So I love that you mentioned fire, because I think there are a few challenges, and you talked about it as being the sort of resolvable challenge of they might not be subject matter experts. They may have knowledge that's only, sort of in a certain vertical versus more of a horizontal or broad understanding. But I think with fire, and then with the provision of good information and connections into a project team, yeah, you can literally, cross some of those bridges pretty easily and make those connections, so that people are change ambassadors the way you're describing them, I think, also know how to help themselves. That's
exactly. Yeah. The ability to learn and the hunger to learn, and then a certain generosity to share as well.
Oh, I love that. Generosity is really important too. Yes, because I think that, people have got to be able to go out there and just be really open with what they've got, not hoard information, etc. Okay, cool. That's wonderful. So, Martin, you've worked in different types of environments to Saskia. Do you have a different experience, or would you say more of the same? Who's the best change ambassador you've ever worked with?
I would say, thank you for the questions. Well-connected, knowledgeable, and passionate fire. I absolutely share those attributes with Saskia. However, I think these people, just to add a couple of points, I think they need a certain maturity level. And I'm not talking about the age, but, like young people can also have somehow of wisdom, meaning that they are focusing more to the future and say, okay, what's the future state I want? They have the big picture. So the best change ambassadors I had, they were actually already quite open to change, even though they went through change programs before I joined the project. And they were tired of it and said, not again, we didn't finish the last one and now we do a new one. However, they still kept this kind of, okay, we can still do it better, learn from the mistakes. So that is one of the aspects. And another aspect is that, for me, the best thing was they are local. Because if you have a global change program, you need a local execution. And I had projects where we had sites, like locations, but we also had global teams to do the change, which was even more difficult and more challenging. And since these people were well connected and, had the network at local level, they were much more able to execute the change because they knew how the constellations work. For example, in one location, some of the departments didn't talk at all. And one of the global input was to break down the silos. Whereas in the other location, there were no silos and it was the same company. So it really depends on the local deviations. That's where we could benefit from the change ambassadors most.
So, Martin, I'm going to pull on that thread because this is very interesting to me, and I've experienced this personally in change work that I've done. So if you are lucky enough to have more local people identified, let's assume we're lucky enough for that, how do you, in a global role, think about preparing those people? Can we talk technical steps?
That's a very good question. So I just need to put on my lights. I mean, they are not change managers as we are, right? So I always call it, they need kind of a mini setup, make them up and running as fast as possible. So first of all, they need to understand the why, because people always approach them from the local side, say, why are we doing this? I mean, I just don't understand the message. You know, people in the US in the head office make up some ideas, but, you know, we are here in Switzerland, it's different. So the change ambassadors get a briefing of the big picture. So like a one page, like the business case, you know, like what do we want to achieve? Why are we doing that? And then I give input about what we've done behind the scenes. So when we did the current state, the future state, the change impact, I show the matrix, but I'm not going into details. I say, hey, this is where you need to look at obstacles, because from my last 10 projects, you know, when it comes to workshops, we don't want to wash dirty clothes in front of the stakeholders. So that's where we say, hey, why don't you first agree within your group that you have the same voice to the stakeholders, for example. So I give tips and hints, but always customized. You know, maybe in Australia it works different because people are more in a group, whereas in Germany they need a strict framework with 20 lines per task, so they will execute. So, you know, I always adapt to the local culture and reflect what the change ambassador needs, you know. And I give a brief also, you know, where are we in the roadmap? So where is the change communication happening? And, you know, we need to differentiate between sequential change, which I did with one client. So I was at the site, preparing the next site, but still doing post change management support at the old site. So that's the luxury version. I call it the Rolls-Royce version, right? Where I really could take care of the change ambassadors one-to-one, you know. And most of the companies nowadays tend to have this parallel rollout. So you're a change manager and you're responsible for, let's say, 10 countries. It's crazy. You can't really have these individual windows for everyone. So in the luxury or the Rolls-Royce version, you know, I would call it, you know, you have the ability to really spend time. Whereas in the parallel, you really need to have group discussions. You need to give the message, but you can't really give the individual briefing every time. So that's the big difference. And therefore, when I had, for example, the approach from one country where in our plan, we planned the town hall in October, but in September he said, hey, my stakeholders approaching me, they want to know what's going on. Oh no, in 4 weeks we have the town hall. So we created a mini town hall just for this location after alignment with the head office to say, hey, what can we say? What is too early? Where do we, but at least we gave some comfortability to the people affected in that location. So you need to be more reactive in that way. Whereas when you have the sequential change, country by country, let's say, which takes longer, it costs more, but it pays off in the long run, right? You are more proactive and you can really, you know, prevent things. Whereas in the parallel run, it's like firefighting. it's reactive mode, right?
I think there's some wonderful tips there, Martin. And you started with a thing about giving people talking points. And I wanted to switch to you, Saskia, because you and I have talked about this previously, or all three of us have talked about this, you know, having talking points or FAQs. And in your experience, Saskia, how often do you update those for your change ambassadors? Because, you know, preparing them at the beginning is one thing. I think what I've heard so many times is, you know, and then I just felt left alone. So people who came in and thought, oh, this isn't going to be so bad, I'm getting help being prepared. And then all of a sudden it felt to them that there was nothing else there.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds so relatable. So Martin, when I heard you talk about indeed those talking points, I had to think about my Sunday approach. I love talking in analogies because I think that gets everyone to the same page. And to get to your question, Ursula, I think like a Sunday that melts at some point. So the analogy goes very well. And the Sunday approach that we used was there are some standard talking points. Everyone needs to get the cone and the plain ice cream. That is the core message that everyone then needs. But then the local countries would get some tips and tricks and things that they could do, pick from the topping bar. So they could, we would have a core message, and they could make that a screensaver, they could make that a poster, they could make that little cards, and we would have things prepared that they could do with it, but they would be able to decide what works in their location, their culture, their background, and also what they liked, right? So I think that menu of toppings with certain fixed standard, that worked really well, but it only works, to your point, Ursula, if that is refreshed every now and then. Because if the program runs for a very long time, one of the programs that I've done that literally run over 2 years, you can't keep coming up with that same old ice cream every now and then, every time. People will go like, yeah, I've heard that. So it is important to, and that will depend a little bit on where you are in the duration of your program. But I would say every other month there should be at least something new coming, right? To keep the message fresh, to add the latest things. If I think about the current changes that are going on at the moment at Philips, every month there is something new. Either there's a news article that is worth mentioning, or there's a new step, or there's an event that we can link into. So every other month at least keeps the message fresh and fun.
Absolutely, and I'm keeping an eye on the conversation that's going on in the chat as well, which is really interesting. So I'm going to pick up on that. So Paige had mentioned in the chat that she had read about taking people who are sort of really anti what's going on, the naysayers, let's say, and trying to convert them into change ambassadors. So I'm going to start with my own experience. You know, I do know from a psychological point of view, where there is energy, you have the opportunity to switch that energy around. So I have had some tremendous success over the years. And in fact, Jenny Ferguson, who is attending today, Jenny and I partnered up to do this with a couple of, I would call really sticky change ambassadors, or people that we needed to champion change. We worked really, really hard to address all of their arguments, to help them have complete visibility to what was happening, as much as sort of senior leaders had, and so on. So you can do that, but it does take time. If you can switch them around, hallelujah, it is a glorious thing. And quite often those will be people who eventually find themselves into change roles because they suddenly realize how powerful it is. Where I would say one has to be cautious, and I'd love to know from both of you, Martin and Saskia, is when you have people who are just apathetic. So, you know, they've been designated, assigned, resourced as a change ambassador, and you just kind of get nothing from them. What is, you know, what are your approaches to try? And let's just take a brief moment to see why might they be apathetic, and how can you maybe prepare them a bit to turn that around? Any thoughts? Saskia, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think having really those people who sit back, say nothing, I would try to light a fire somewhere. So see if there is anything that they are passionate about. Ask what they were hoping to get out of their role. Ask how they would see what success could look like. See if there is anything that we can trigger to motivate and to find that spark. Because I often say this in relation to resistance, is I don't believe anyone comes to work with the idea of, I'm going to make your life difficult. Or even, I don't want to do anything today. I don't want to make an impact. I like to think that everyone wants to do something. So there will be something behind those people that make them like that? Is it are they not able to, right? Do they have the right skills? Maybe they don't know how to make an impact, or do they just not believe that anything ever will matter? Or are they maybe stuck? Or is there something else going on? Because I really, Stacey, what you're saying, I like to assume a positive intent, and I like to tap into that rather than push people down.
So Saskia, I'm going to ask you a follow-on question. Again, it tracks back to something we've spoken about before, emotional support for change ambassadors. Because I know we've talked about how some change ambassadors feel that they don't get support from leaders.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, when I think about it, sometimes I think people are maybe apathetic for a whole lot of reasons, but possibly a big reason is because they cannot see and imagine what that support looks like.
Yeah.
Anything to say about that?
I love that remark, because if people don't believe it will make a difference, they will just go, it doesn't matter anyway. And then a leader actually showing up, not just saying, hey, Ursula, well done, but actually saying, hey, Ursula, when you share this content in that event or meeting, I understood better how it works, and now I can use the tool, or I can use the system, or now I understand what the impact is. I think if leaders can give that support and truly see people, that makes a world of difference.
So I'm hearing that part of what we might want to prepare ambassadors to do is how to actually build those bridges and connections. Of course, great change practitioners are also preparing people leaders in general. So that's a whole different topic about preparing our leaders as going into the change. But maybe we need to do something to prepare the ambassadors to really figure out, how do we build those bridges? How do we actually say, my role is pretty difficult, or it's a big role to make this change work, and this is how you can help me. So I think there's some stuff there, maybe some role playing. Martin, over to you. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a very complex topic, because we need to differentiate at the individual level and at the, let's say, at the overall level. What I try to do is, when I visit the country and I'm new and the change ambassadors know what's going on, I try to understand where they are. Where is this individual person? Because the message is clear, but everyone perceives it differently. So first of all, you can't change people, right? You cannot go and say, hey guys, we need to change the mindset, and these are our 10 points where we want to go, and so you need to change your behavior. That doesn't work. So when people are super angry, I think that's great, because they already have an energy. They're already, so, anger is an energy. You just need to convert it. I'm more concerned about people who are super quiet and watching, because you don't know what's going on. So what I tell to people who are not happy about what's going on, I say, look, if you can't change the things around you, what you always can change is the way you react to it, right? So the way you react is a choice. So, I work on that to say, hey, it's your power how you react. It doesn't mean that you don't care, but you can differentiate between the things you can change and between the things you somehow need to accept. And then you can dig deeper, because you need 4 aspects to be, let's say, mature and stable. Job is one thing, but are these people surrounded by people they love and they like? Do these people live in a place they like? And if those people were dying today, would they die with peace, or do they still have some open topics with the people? If they all answer yes to those 4 questions, then maybe they are depressed. So you need to understand where they are and help them. Because one lady I met, the first introduction, change ambassador, she said, I'm resigning. I mean, it's like my second day on the site. So what I did is I took her out. We walked around the factory. You know, it was a nice walk, and we walked in parallel. So the best meetings you can have when you have a crisis is go for a walk next to each other, and starting asking those questions about how you can react, what happened. And then I persuaded her to stay, and she became the best change ambassadors in that site which we implemented. So, you know, you can always convert things, but you need to understand where these people are standing. So that's the individual part. Now, the global part is different. So what I did in companies saying, okay, what was the lessons learned from your last change? How can we change the context? So for example, if people come to you and say, hey, this is the 5th, 6th change program, the last one was not really implemented. So we just had to make sure we changed the context by meaning, for example, bottom up. We hear your voice. We want people really to speak up, not to be afraid to lose their job, but really say what's going on in your local organization so we can improve. However, that needs a trust. That needs a pact with the unknown. So I always teach people you have to have trust, otherwise it won't work. But trust means you give up your control. You have the pact with the unknown. So that needs to be aware of what we are doing. So when the management says, okay, we agree with changing the context, then in the workshops, what you need to do is to talk about roles and responsibilities. You need to talk about ways of working. And if that is being agreed for the future state, then obviously the behavior will change because people understand, oh, okay, the context is changing. Now I can change the behavior because it makes sense. And then they will change their mindset. But it will never work if you come up with the first point saying, guys, you need to change your mind. We all know that doesn't work.
Yes, because we don't have a handle on the outside, right? Or a switch. Exactly. It's all on the inside. Those switches are all on the inside. So those are very important points, Martin. I really like that. So, you know, if we think about, I'm just going to summarize a couple of things I've heard before we talk about more about preparing them. What I've heard each of you say is the first thing is, even if you had no part in actually the selection of the change ambassadors and the description and so on, you've both really talked about trying to get to know them a little bit. And obviously that's really hard when there's a large number of people and you are a single change practitioner or a small team. But I think there are ways that you both indicated, you know, try to get to understand who they are, where they are at. The other thing, and I'm going to paraphrase it using a term that I really, really like, and I actually use this term when I'm with change ambassadors, is I talk about the contracting. So I talk about, you know, you're here, I'm here, this is my role, this is how I'm going to support you, or the team is going to support you, and how the sponsor and leaders, so all of that needs to be somewhat clear, not super detailed, but at least in a framework way clear. And then I talk about contracting. So let's talk about what is the contract, which is really like, it's less about the doing. It's almost more of a moral contract that I'm interested in with my change ambassadors. And both of you have inferred that in different ways. You know, how do they bring things back to you, that they should be comfortable with ambiguity and the unknown, etc. And I think if we can get those two sort of foundational pillars with our ambassadors, then the other stuff starts to feel less manufactured and more natural. Then if we think...
Can I add to that?
Yes,
I love what you're saying on building that contract, and what popped into my mind, what conversation I was just having earlier today, is it can then become a part of their identity, right? It's something to be proud of. And I think if you can tap into that, and with that contract, it always almost makes it a bit more official. So it's something to be proud of. I've had people with like a marked bottle with a little champion logo, and they would really walk around with, I'm a champion. It's something to be proud of, to be recognized with. And I think when you're phrasing it with that contract, it's that identity as well that makes it lifts it up.
Exactly, because that contracting really is about self-leadership.
Yes, yes.
We're in this together and we each need to play our part, or all of us need to play our parts to make it really successful. But as an individual, you do carry, and Martin, your point about maturity is definitely not lost on me. There's a certain level of stretch, but also maturity that is required that doesn't have to do with years in the job or the color of one's hair. I think that's much more of a kind of a mental fortitude that ideally we have, but we know that sometimes people reach that because they have taken a change ambassador role and they've experienced being prepared well, being supported by, you know, those around them. So I wanted to just go a little bit more into the practical sides of supporting. So let's imagine, you know, we're getting a new system ready to launch in the organization. What would the practical things be, Martin, that we could offer change ambassadors so that they, so some of that ambiguity and unknown is reduced for them, that therefore they can carry sort of positive experience messages into the organization? So how would you see that going, Martin?
The part of the contract is really to give them the big picture. So, you know, we don't do the change because sake of the change, but for what? Why are we doing it? So that has to be super clear to them. But my job really is, because those people are super talents, you know, they're more than an SME. They know, they already know, but they need support from us. Let's say like in the artillery in the back. So I establish a good one-to-one with the, you know, the leads, the leadership team. So one, for example, the leader for Switzerland, right? Who might be the boss of the boss of the boss of the change ambassador. But with this guy or with this lady, I need to have regular one-to-ones to give feedback about, hey, you change ambassador, don't burn her. She's very good. But you sold change ambassador like 2 hours per week. She works 2 hours per day for that project, besides her work. You know, so I need to release those change ambassadors, but I can't tell them, oh, you just, you know, don't answer the 50 emails after the workshop. No, I'm the point of escalation, but in a good way. So I go back to the leadership team and say, you know, we have these 5 people who are really struggling, not because they don't know, but because they are overloaded. So the message you gave needs to be changed. How can we release them? Or maybe we even have to replace. But once we replaced the guy, and I was in Italy, you know, the local team was angry about me and say, not again, we have to do all this knowledge transfer. And, you know, so you need to be very careful about ensuring that these people are able to perform. But our role as change managers is to give that environment, again, the contact. So we build the contact. So the change ambassadors even can take the risks. So we say, hey, risk means action. You move. If you fail, I'm here to hold you. And then I sort the problem out with not only with your line manager, but with the manager of your line manager. And then the message goes back again to the site and things are okay because the leadership team is involved. They know what's going on.
Great. That's a really good examples. And I think, you know, you're talking about people, these are good people who know their job. One of the things that you had shared, Saskia, is also around, you know, getting them involved in UAT testing and so on, so that they really are continuing to build their knowledge in advance, so that when people do ask them questions, they don't have to say every time, I don't know. You know, you're continuing to help them really be that sharp edge of knowledge and understanding of what the change is that's coming. I wanted just to pop into the chat because I saw something really interesting here. Annabelle put in the chat that some ambassadors wonder about their own credibility and legitimacy and how their peers will view their promotion, you know, that they want their role to be made public before it starts. So yes, Annabelle, I have experienced that too. People wanted to make sure that in a town hall, you know, there was a slide put up or whatever, or on the internet, you know, I am a change ambassador. So I agree with you with that. I've also personally taken a different approach in the last 5 years, is I have said to people, you know, this is in the contracting, this is the role that you are playing. but I would prefer it if you didn't actually call yourself a change ambassador out there. Why would I say that to them? Well, what I have noticed again, and this is psychology, peers will very often pay better attention if someone just comes along and says to them, hey, how can I help you, Saskia? I was in the user testing, I had some time, I did this, how can I help you? So you change that focus again from sort of more of a, command and control type of relationship, another layer of management in air quotes, to peers who are there to help each other. And I called it a social experiment. I do a lot of safe social experiments in my change work. And I sort of forgot about it. I just, I had this group of ambassadors. I said, are you happy to experiment with me on this? And I forgot all about it until months later. And one of them came to me and said, I've been tapped as a change manager probably 10 times in the last 15 years. And this was the best experience ever.
Wow.
Because all I needed to do was to say, I'm here to help. How can I help? And, that was a whole different game plan. Now, I know culturally in some organizations, they don't like that, etc. But what my observation is when people didn't have to sort of live up to the name, they also, strangely, human psychology is fascinating. They took a bit more of a self-leadership role in figuring out what they needed in order to be most effective in helping that change happen. So that's just a suggestion to some of you. It may work in your organizations, it may not. But thanks, Annabelle. That was a great question. I just wanted to see what else was in here, because they're stealth ambassadors. Yeah, stealth ambassadors, exactly. And of course, some of those will just naturally be there anyway. Some of them will be stealth ambassadors. Jenny said, yep, change and comms update to every SteerCo meeting. Wow, I wish we had a little video that we could share, but we don't. When Jenny and I worked with this very, very difficult group, and we literally met with them every week because they were, let's call them super change ambassadors. So these were senior level people in a massive global change, and they weren't really connected with each other. So there was a bit of infighting. And they were also people who, Jenny and I think it's fair to say, felt disrespected. People who were actually doing the work. It's like, oh, why can't they get, that kind of just not understanding what it's like when you are working in two worlds. You've got to deliver today. You've got to keep the business running. You have to hit your targets. And you're trying to learn and integrate and bring all these new things in. And so we tried different approaches. And one of the things that actually in our preparation was interesting is we took a little bit more of an agile approach. To be fair, Jenny and I also played kind of a good cop, bad cop game. So clearly everybody would know me. I was the bad cop. I was really roughing them up, challenging them. Why would you say that? What would you think if someone said that to you? And Jenny was the good cop and sort of calm, ruffled the ruffled feathers. But we took a bit more of an agile approach because we also needed, timelines. This is often what hits us, timelines. We've got these people that are going to help us, but we don't have a lot of time. So we had a meeting with this group and we said, what are all the things you think you need to best help you fulfill that contract that we have made? And we created a little bit of a sort of a backlog. And then we got some of them to work together with each other. Some of them worked with Jenny specifically because she was our communications expert. Some of them worked with me directly because it was more about, can I have a little module, for example, or a little vignette on how to manage resistance? So we broke up the different pieces of preparation that they were looking for in an agile way. And then we made them teach each other. And I literally say made because Jenny and I had to strong arm them a little bit. But, in an ideal world, it's like, well, here is your first experience. You co-created this with me. Now, in a safe space, how about you try and share that with your peers? So I think it's fair to say we managed to do a really good job of preparing them in some respects by taking a little bit more from the agile sort of methodology and co-creating. It was clearly something none of them had ever done before, but I think it's fair to say that it worked successfully with almost the whole group. We still had some outliers, and I think, you know, the reality is sometimes we do just have outliers. But I'm going to hand it now back, Saskia, to you. What are the other practical things you've done in Philips? I have a little bit of an idea from work that we've done in the past, but what are the other practical things you've done in Philips to help those ambassadors really do a fabulous sort of deal with the role they find themselves in?
Yeah, thinking about a couple of the things that work really well, and we talked about UAT already, especially if it is a tool-related thing, they need to have seen the tool before, right? Especially, as you say, there's nothing more disempowering than not having all the answers, having to tell multiple times, I actually also don't know. So I think having that access is really, really important. And the recognition or the connection to leaders, I think that is a really important one. We talked about talking points already, right? Having the Sunday ready and make sure that they refresh the Sunday every now and then. And someone also mentioned training, and I think it is really important to make sure that they are equipped with some sort of speaking training, if that is a part of it. If it is training on how do you deal with resistance? Is it what is change fatigue and how do you come against it, right? Just providing them with things to put in their back pocket, so when they're approaching people, they can really feel equipped to have those conversations. I think that is really important. And I think the last one that I was writing down, also triggered by your nice summary, is that community, right? So I think we talked already about the importance that there are many change champion, because they are the linking pin, but also then the ability that they can have some sparring. Hey, I'm bumped into this. How have you resolved it? And that they know that that is okay. I think every time I'm connecting people, peers, on these kind of things, they're like, oh, I'm not on my own. Mm-hmm. So having sessions with the champions together, build that community, I think that's really important as well.
I love that. And I also love the idea of you describing them having things in their pockets. It's really about the change ambassadors knowing that they've got their own toolkits, and some of them will need to rely on some of the tools more than others, both because of circumstances and their own skill. But I really like that idea. So Martin, let's talk a little bit about community, because we all know human beings like a sense of belonging. And as Saskia said, it's very empowering when you know you're not alone. And also that you can go to a place where you can try something out. If you've had a bit of a challenge or you need to do something that might not be quite comfortable for you. In those big global projects that you've been on, Martin, how do you create a community for change ambassadors?
We really followed one of the statements from the big picture, you know, where it says, think global, act local. And what do I mean by that? So first of all, I totally agree with you guys to have a change ambassadors network. Network means that we have an intro call where all change ambassadors take part. And this gives the big picture, you know, why are we doing it? Where do we want to go, etc. So that's the thing where we start. But then, you know, like a surgeon at the local level, we actually help where they struggle. Because they have the intro about the roadmap, they have the intro about, you know, UAT, the test cases, whatever. But when it comes down to local, you need to make sure you're still comfortable. And the way we did that, which was really successful, were different levels of workshops. Okay, so we didn't start with the big bang where everyone was having huge workshops. We first started with pre-workshops only with the senior leadership team. So we had like maximum 10 leaders where we defined, you know, the change impact at the global level. Okay, so let's say we had the most important topics already given top down from the managers. Then we introduced that to the community of change ambassadors, including those stakeholders at the local side, saying that is coming from your leader, which is important in your country. Can you elaborate more deep on that? So then we had a second round, which we called internal workshops. And those were per site or per global team, whoever was impacted from the change, because we want to save the outcome before we reach the really, really important stakeholders of the program. So once the change is implemented, this is the benefit for those important stakeholders, as we call it. So we had this step between first pre-workshops, then internal workshops, to have one clear message to the stakeholders. Whether these stakeholders are in Switzerland or in the UK, doesn't matter, because of course they will deviate. However, the big picture, the frame is still given. And that was very good because the change ambassadors felt comfortable. They were not thrown into the water. We had this three-stage approach of pre-workshops. We got alignment from the leadership team. We had the internal workshops. We got alignment from the local country impact. And then we had the stakeholder workshops where the outcome of the workshops before.
Okay, yeah. So to summarize, what I'm hearing about community is it's a place where that learning continues for the ambassadors.
Yes.
Whether it is about stitching the big picture together to how you're going to talk about it, and possibly anything else that a change ambassador may touch or experience, that community is a place where that learning continues. So I see that as kind of being a really centrifugal force in that change ambassador network, that it just keeps building the energy and the learning and helping people continue to feel.
Let me give you an example. When it came to the change impact analysis in the internal workshops, right? So the input was the same, but from the US, they actually introduced 10 impacts, right? The Germans introduced 223 impacts. You know, and I said, Germany, I love you, but are you aware of what you're doing? You will be overwhelmed when you start to implement those changes. So give me the top 10. You know how Americans are. They want a one page, they want it simplify, you know, give me the big picture. So I had to be different for the Germans, say, this is all good, but please make sure we start with the top 10. Then we can still, you know, continue with the rest. So you need to balance, because at the end, you know, we need to reach the target.
Yeah, and that's actually the most important mantra you have described that I have ever used in my change work, is the ability to adapt and connect. So, you know, it will be different in different places, but if we cannot adapt and connect, we will fail in making the change work. So those are wonderful. I'm going to just go to the chat for a minute because there's a lot of stuff happening in the chat, and we've got just a couple of moments left. So I saw, Stacey, you had asked a question about how many change ambassadors. That's actually not a question that we are going to answer today. That will definitely be a question that we will cover in our next event, about how to, establish how many, how do we select them, etc. It's a very good question, and I will tell you there is not one answer to it. So, you know, whatever you're doing now is better than nothing, and we will certainly try and answer that question in a more broad way that is about all the nuances in organizations when we have our next event. Let's see what else is in here.
I try to answer some of those with just
You've done a good job. And Jenny said, yes, using locals, works councils and forums is also a great pool for ambassadors. So I think, you know, the thing is also intuitively as you're setting up, and I know this is a big conversation for next time, but look at who would already naturally have the connections. And the other thing is sometimes people will come towards you. I mean, I have had this experience where a person that I didn't even think was really interested came to me and said, I really want to be that. Goes back to your idea about the fire, Saskia. So, you know, we've talked about, in summary, a whole lot of different ways that we can help prepare change ambassadors. And I would say the overarching theme here is that they never feel they've been left completely on their own. You know, they're taking on something in addition to their day job. If it's a bit out of balance, we need to help and negotiate and see what that really looks like so that they can do justice to it. You know, maybe that is also increasing the number of change ambassadors. There's a number of different ways that one can problem solve for that. But I think the key message of this conversation with the two of you is we don't leave them alone. We create spaces for them to continue to learn about the content of their role and how they can empower others, because, you know, that's the whole idea of having a change ambassador. It is to empower others to make that change work. It's not simply a conduit. They are not just a mouthpiece. They are definitely there to bring that energy in and to make every person who's going to be touched by that change have a better experience of it, right? It's all about having a less painful, more empowered experience of change. So all of the things that we've talked about have really sort of been around, let's make sure we don't leave them alone. We've heard from Saskia that there's some really structured things that Philips have, which are wonderful examples. Martin, as a consultant for many years, has tried various different things, you know, definitely context driven, be more structured, be less structured. I've done different things too. What I would encourage all of you who've tuned in with us today is you can continue to send us questions. You know, after today, please send your questions and also your ideas, because we all learn from each other in this way. I really hope that this is confirmed, or you have relearned for yourself some of the things that you may have done in the past and wondered whether it works. And I hope you've also learned some new things. Following from today, we're going to create a summary with a sort of key points in more detail than I've just summarized. So that will go out to all of you. And, you know, this is the place for the conversation. And I will definitely keep my Chief Conversation Officer hat on, because I love talking about change. We all know change happens one conversation at a time. And these are places where we can have really good conversations with people who are in the trenches. So Saskia, to you, and Martin, to you, I'm very, very grateful for you coming into this conversation, sharing what you know from your experience, being willing to invest this time so that the rest of us can actually have that space to think about our change ambassadors. And to everybody who tuned in today, wonderful to see you. Thank you for all the comments. They're great. I've loved to see that the chat has been happening between you. That's exactly how it should be in this environment. So, you know, let's go out there and really make sure all of our change ambassadors get the best of us, and we can start with contracting. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event about change ambassadors. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.